Well, hello, everyone. It's John Laughland here. I'm the director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. I'm speaking to you this week from Paris, having just returned this morning from Madrid, and having been in St. Petersburg the previous week, I'm beginning to not quite know where I am. We're joined, Peter Lavelle and I, my co-host, are joined and delighted to be joined this week by Alex Krainer. Alex, you've been on the show a couple of times, including recently, but after your last appearance, both Peter and I said to each other, we wanted to have you on your own because previously we've put you on with other people, and that obviously has reduced your time. And you and I, when we exchanged, you said that you wanted to talk about the looming economic crisis. I should say, for those who don't know you, and I expect many of our viewers do know you, that you have established yourself in the last year or so as a very prominent commentator on political affairs. But your background is in finance. I believe you were a commodities trader. And so one of the fascinating things about what you write is indeed the financial angle. And when you talk about economic crisis, I'm basically totally with you on that, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. On the other hand, I feel that the economic crisis has been looming now for so long that I don't really know what an economic crisis is going to look like when it comes, or has it come? What do you mean exactly, Alex?
Well, I think that we are generally not prepared for what the economic crisis looks like because none of us have really lived through one.
Yeah.
That is, we had the crisis of inflation in the 1970s, but that was, I think, moderate relative to what's in front of us. Let's say that the reasoning behind it may seem a little bit convoluted and complex, and I have to confess it took me most of my career to work out some of its elements, because it's nothing like what they teach us in economics courses. You really have to kind of use your imagination and try to connect the dots in the way that makes the best possible sense.
Yeah.
And as someone who has actively participated in the commodity markets in globally for 30 years, I have probably had a better opportunity to work these elements out than the average person. So I'll share what I think, and with the hope that I'm wrong also. But basically, I think that we have to get prepared that the unraveling of the current crisis might resemble something like the unraveling of the German hyperinflationary crisis in the early 1920s, or the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think that for those of us who live on the European continent, we are already aware that the European Union has many disconcerting parallels and similarities with the Soviet Union. In fact, the whole political system is practically the same thing. The monetary system is similar. That is, the currency that we use is basically the same as what the Soviets used. And then we have a different banking system, but it's a very, very highly opaque and corrupt. Okay, so basically, the element that I think is the most important in all this is that our economic system basically functions on fraudulent money.
Yes.
That goes into circulation as debt. If somebody doesn't take on debt, whether it's banks or corporations or governments or households, no money goes into circulation. But the only money that goes into circulation is the principal, which has to be repaid with interest. And that already bakes the seeds of doom into the system from the get-go. Now, we can actually visualize what this looks like, because in the United States they have the system is much more transparent than it is in Europe, and you can go to federal Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. They have a site called FRED, Federal Reserve, I think, Educational Database or something like that. But FRED for short. And you can pull up 2 time series. One used to be called Total Credit Market Debt. They renamed the series, but it's the same thing. Now it's called something like All Sectors, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, if you type Total Credit Market Debt into their search engine, it'll give you the time series. And you will see that it has this kind of a progression, basically. And then you can plot on the same chart a different time series, which is called Monetary Base, which is basically all the money in the system that's available for payment of all those debts, right? And it has this kind of a progression, right? And so last time I looked, the total credit market debt in the system, so that includes federal government, state and local governments, financials, corporates, households, all the debt that is in the system, it arrives to about $120 trillion. And that doesn't include the unfunded liabilities, because that question often pops up. That's without the unfunded liabilities. So there's just the flat out debt that's in the system. $120 trillion, thereabouts, ballpark. And then if you look at the all the money that's available for repayment of those debts, you arrive at around $6 trillion. It may be all a little bit more by now, but ballpark, we're talking about 19 times more debt than there is money available to repay those debts. So that's like a textbook definition of unsustainable, which means that we're going to some kind of an unraveling, but we're not there yet, because people still accept US dollars, euros, pounds, whatever. The system is the same in Europe, in UK, in Japan, practically worldwide. You have the same system.
Yeah, but Alex, is that because there is an awareness of what you just said, okay? That the liabilities, the debt far exceeds what we would call the real economy. People are aware of this, but they don't have an alternative to escape it. This is an inescapable trap.
This is an escapable trap so long as we are stuck with this monetary system. Yeah. And I think that people are only vaguely aware of it. They're not, that if you completely took this on board, you would say, no way, no, how am I accepting US dollars as payment for my services? Please pay me in gold coins or silver or something else. But dollars, this system is due to crash. But obviously it hasn't crashed, and it's progressed in this way. If you look at this 20 years ago, you would arrive to the same conclusion, which means that the system has been able to hold itself together. It is a house of cards, but it hasn't collapsed in a very long time. But there is mathematically no way to avoid a collapse. So the collapse is coming. It's just a question of when. And we can't exclude that it might not last another 10 years or another 20 years or however many. Who knows? Because it's all based on confidence.
Yes.
So long as people have confidence that the dollar that they receive in payment for their labor, for their products, services, whatever they offer on the market, they expect that they will be able to use that dollar to buy what they need. But at some point, what happens is that people do start to lose confidence in the currency. And at that time, at that moment, you start seeing people trying to get rid of it as quickly as they possibly can.
Sure.
Which starts to exacerbate inflationary trends.
Yeah.
And then the more inflation there is in the system, the more people lose confidence, and it's like a self-reinforcing cycle, which then at some moment accelerates. Okay, so what is tipping us over the inflection point where we enter this dynamic? I think that it's the geopolitical setbacks that the Western world has experienced in Ukraine and in the Middle East. Okay, I'll go back a moment to the currency and the way it enters into circulation, and the fact that it only enters as debt, as principal on debt. So what you have is kind of a Ponzi scheme, basically, because if I take on, let's say, $100,000 in debt, and over the life of that loan, I take a loan, right? Over the life of that loan, I have to pay back pretty much $200,000. Where does the other $100,000 come from? I have to go out and earn it. And in order for that for there to be an extra $100,000, other people, households, corporates, banks, governments have to take on debt to put that money into circulation. So we are all in a bit of a rat race, one against the other, because nobody wants to go bankrupt. And so long as the system is expanding, most people, most companies manage. Some even manage to prosper. But the moment the system stops expanding, it automatically starts, the house starts to crumble.
Yeah, so it has to carry on growing. The bubble has to carry on growing.
Exactly.
Otherwise it bursts, yeah.
Exactly. But in the process, let's say every individual economy at some point ends up saturated with debt, because it mops up all the quality collateral. So let's say if I go to the bank and I ask $100,000, they're going to say like, okay, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's a loan. It's in your account, credited, and you can use that money. But if I ask them for $100 million, they will say no, because they aren't confident I'll be able to repay it, right? So this is true for anybody, for any company, for any bank, household. There's a certain debt limit beyond which you cannot go.
Well, what about for governments?
Oh, yeah. Governments could go on pretty much forever, but they do have to be careful, because they too can generate inflation, right? And so they do abuse the system very, very heavily, but they still have to reckon with the market. If the United States government goes out and tries to sell, let's say, $300 billion worth of their treasury bonds, the market will absorb it. If they try to place $30 trillion worth of treasury bonds in one go, they won't be able to do it, and that's going to make the interest rates go up very highly. Okay, so they have to. Governments are also subject to market forces.
Alex, I just gave a lecture yesterday on energy, and I argued, to put it very simply, that the United States has cornered very important sections of the world energy market and knocked out some of its major competitors. I'm thinking of Qatar and Russia. I mean, when I say knocked out, I don't mean knocked out completely. I mean that for big markets like the European market and so on, and to some extent for China. And I concluded my argument by drawing attention to what happened to gold in the last year and a half. Gold rose by 40 or 50% in 2025, which is normally taken as a sign of collapse of confidence in the dollar, because people go into gold when they think the dollar is unstable or whatever, or when they think that the world is unstable. But that tendency, that rise, that sharp rise, a spectacular rise, we haven't seen a rise like that since the 1970s in the gold price, has now gone back into reverse following the seizure of Venezuelan oil, following the destruction of the LNG facilities in Qatar, and following, broadly speaking, the emergence of the United States as the world's biggest now producer of both oil and gas. Is there anything in what I said? I mean, like you, I've looked at these quantities of debt, both private and public, for years, and just thought the whole thing is unsustainable. But here we are seeing what Richard Medhurst calls the petrogas dollar to replace the petrodollar. In other words, the petrodollar was when you needed dollars to buy Saudi oil, but the petrogas dollar is when you need dollars to buy American oil and gas. So do you think there's been any turn in the trend, any renewed confidence now in the dollar?
No, I think it's quite the opposite, because what you say is absolutely correct, and there's much evidence that the United States is quite aggressively trying to take control of most of energy flows wherever they can. And Sergei Lavrov was recently saying in an interview that the United States wants to take control of Russia's oil and gas sales. So that's clearly part of their game. But I think that most people see the United States selling their oil and making profits as the ultimate objective of the game. But this is relatively minor compared to energy flows as collateral. And I'll explain this. So I'll go back to the point where we've saturated an economic system with debt.
Yeah.
So now the Ponzi scheme can no longer grow. It's hit speed bumps, and it can no longer expand, which means that the house of cards begins to crumble. So now, in order to keep growing it, you need new collateral. You need more collateral to be brought into the system. And this is where colonialism comes into the game, because if you go to other countries that have a large labor force and let's say profitable low debt enterprises and natural resources, well, if you take political control of those countries, then you can turn their wealth into your collateral.
So, I remember you making this point about the rare earths deal that Ukraine has signed with both Britain and Russia.
That's one example.
Yeah,
that's one example, but it's basically everything, because if you take a simple example, let's say that Qatar has a lot of natural gas, right? Somebody had to develop that natural gas extraction, whatever happens before it reaches your stove at home. So let's say Royal Dutch Shell went in there and developed Qatar's natural gas resources. I mean, I don't know this to be the fact. Maybe it was BP, maybe it was somebody else. It doesn't matter. But as a matter of principle, and let's say that at that moment they need $1 billion to finance all that development, to build the plants, the rigs, the processing, the ports, the ships, everything that goes in has to be financed. So ExxonMobil or BP will turn to their banker and they will ask for $1 billion loan. And because they can have this contract in Qatar, they will get the loan because the loan will be guaranteed with Qatari resources as collateral. So the minute let's say JP Morgan issues that loan to ExxonMobil, that loan becomes an asset on JP Morgan's balance sheet. Yep. And JP Morgan in that second is $1 billion richer. They didn't do anything. They didn't fight a war. They didn't do any work, but $1 billion is on their book. And over the life of that loan, it'll be repaid probably several times over, the way that works.
Yep.
And so the result is going to be a flow of funds, flow of cash from the sales of Qatari resource to JP Morgan. And you can then multiply that to practically everything, because let's say you overthrow the Iranian regime and you install a Zelensky there, a Shah or Boris Yeltsin or Juan Guaido, whoever, and now he's going to be your puppet. He's going to sign everything that you put in front of him. And you say like, oh, well, you have all these resources and you have all this infrastructure and we're going to modernize it and advance it. And, obviously it's going to take a lot of money. We in the West are going to be sold the story about the Marshall Plan because, look, we're helping this country develop. But basically, what we're going to be doing is taking their wealth and turning it into collateral of Western financial institutions. And this will create money flows from all those regions to Wall Street, to the City of London, to Paris, and then minor satellites like Frankfurt, Stockholm will get some cut, but basically this is the financial foundation of colonialism. And my contention is that this is what actually generates colonialism, because the parties that play a visible role in all this are the multinational corporations. We see the KBRs and Halliburtons and BPs and all these corporations even behave very abusively in their host countries.
Yeah.
But they don't actually have that incentive. That is, a corporation could do business in a different way. Let's say they could buy the oil. Let's say they can buy the crude oil or natural gas or peanuts or pineapples from the exporter from that country. So they could buy crude oil from an Iranian exporting company. They don't care how it was extracted, how it was loaded onto ships, who built the ports. They could just simply buy the oil, put their margin on top, sell it in their domestic market, and have a great business model, make a lot of profits, and live happily ever after.
Yeah.
But for the bank, and another thing is that a corporation would normally be indifferent whether the loan, the $1 billion loan, comes from JP Morgan or from Sberbank or from a Chinese bank or from an Iranian bank. They don't care. $1 billion is $1 billion. It allows them to do whatever they have to do, right? So but for JP Morgan, it makes all the difference, because either they put that $1 billion asset on their balance sheet or they put zero on their balance sheet.
Yeah.
So it's their incentive to keep their Ponzi scheme going, to keep it from imploding, and to keep turning everybody else's resources, infrastructure, labor, creativity, know-how into their collateral, which then creates these insanely massive flows of wealth from wherever they can take political control to City of London, Wall Street, and their other minor satellites around the world. So this is who ultimately instigates wars, not in any visible way, but it's once you're aware of this, you start seeing it again and again and again.
Well, so Alex, using your logic, the war against Iran is actually all about oil.
Yes. No, sorry. Not only about oil. It's about everything. Iran is the 5th wealthiest country in the world in terms of natural resources. They have a very highly educated population of 92 million plus people. Those resources are not going to extract themselves and load themselves onto a ship. You need slave drivers there, right? So you need labor force. And Iran's resource wealth is estimated at $30 trillion. So if you knowing how our Ponzi scheme monetary system works, you know that you can issue multiples of that amount in loans. So it would provide a massive credit impulse to Western banks. So when they talk about Marshall Plan, they're not talking about helping another country. They're talking about subjugating it through debt.
Yes.
And then, Trump being Trump, he says the quiet part out loud. He says, we'll help them reconstruct, we'll make a Marshall Plan for Iran, but we'll take half their oil.
Yeah,
that's right. And then, obviously, Wall Street banks would be the ones who make the most money. And one thing that I've discovered when I researched how the anti-terror operation in Ukraine started in 2014, it was pushed forward by the IMF, at the time you had Christine Lagarde, who was at the head of the IMF, and she was given direction by U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew, and they were saying, "We'll give the new Ukrainian government a bailout. We'll give them loans, but they have to take control of the Donbass.
Yeah,
they have to take control of the whole country."
Yeah.
Then we had all these Western advisors.
Well, we should point out to our viewers why the Donbass, because if you look at the entire Ukrainian economy, okay, I'm going to pull a figure out of the air here, but it's going to be approximate. About 80% of Ukraine's economy at the time is centered in the Donbass. I mean, and the rest of Ukraine is maybe pretty, but it's not worth much.
Yes, exactly. And the people in Donbass immediately rebelled against the government. The government wasn't, they were happy to be in charge in Kiev. They were happy to be in government, but neither the junta in Kiev nor Ukrainian armed forces were terribly keen on waging war. And so they had to be pushed into it. And the push came from the IMF. And the IMF, we know, is a very, very scary organization. And most of the countries in the world are, for reasons that I can't quite understand. It's vague to me. But I saw again and again and again that in every country, government officials are deathly afraid of the IMF.
When you say the push came from the IMF, what form did that push take, and what's your source? What's your let's have some more substance to this. What exactly?
And who is pushing the IMF? You see what you're saying?
The IMF is going to be pushed by the financial cartel, by the global banking cartel, who are ultimately in control of the IMF. The IMF is kind of a pseudo supranational political entity, but it's not. Now, if you ask me for a source, I would have to look into my note. Do you want me to do that? Because it's going to take me 2 minutes.
No, I just wondered when you said that. Yeah, I mean, you can. Sorry, I'm not trying to. The point of my question is
the point is here is if you're going to you want Ukraine for NATO, for finance, for neo-colonial, whatever. Whoever wants it for whatever reason, if you're going to get it, you have to have the Donbass.
Yeah,
that's all. Yeah. That's all that matters. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But okay. Without
it, J.P. Morgan wants it. A lot of people want it for a lot of different reasons, but to get it, you're going to have the Donbass. That's why we have a conflation of so many things happening at the same time, which brought about the war.
Yeah.
Basically, John, off the top of my head, I remember there was an article in mainstream media that was saying that the new government has to take the control of the Donbass.
Yeah.
And then if you read into the article, you saw that there was Jack Lew, the U.S. Treasury Secretary at the time, who played a role, who leaned on Christine Lagarde of the IMF. The IMF conditioned the loans. This is all out in the open, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
The IMF conditioned the loans to the Ukrainian government on taking control of the South and the Donbass. And then the dirty work is done by people like John Brennan, like the former Swedish Prime Minister, Carl Bildt. Joe Biden, Lindsey Graham, and was the late senator, his best friend,
John McCain.
John McCain. They were all shuttling in and out of Ukraine. I think that Carl Bildt made 7 individual trips. John Brennan practically set up CIA in control of most of the ministries in the new cabinet, and they were the ones who basically formulated the anti-terror operation as the initiative to launch a military assault on the Donbass and on Odessa. To take control of them. They succeeded in Odessa. They staged on 2 May. They staged a horrific massacre, which is all regular part of the playbook. Massacres always initiate civil wars because people have to be galvanized with some horrific emotional event into fighting wars. And then it was a slow going, but Arsen Avakov then, who was in charge of I think Ministry of Defense or Interior Ministry, he made sure to seat all the units of the armed force of Ukraine who had a lot of scruple about shooting at their own people. They put 2, 3, 4, 5 of these Banderas, Azov battalion people into every unit to make sure that they don't hesitate to shoot at people. And so by July 2014, you had already about 2,000 casualties, and then it got going from there. And by 2022, we had 14,000 casualties.
Sure. Alex, can I take you back to something you said at the beginning when you said Europe is much more corrupt and obscure, the financial system, and then you started to give as a counterexample the Fed, which you say is more transparent. Listening to you, and it's very plausible. I mean, it's completely plausible, your argument, when you say that the banks and financial interests essentially push, in this case Ukraine, but push countries into war and into conflict because they need to control the territory for collateral. That all makes perfect sense. And indeed, in my lecture yesterday, I drew attention to that. The American state, the United States of America as a political entity, quite clearly conflates in its various official documents like the National Security Strategy and also in NATO documents. They totally conflate their foreign policy objectives and their commercial interests with security interests. In other words, as you've just said, Alex, it's John Brennan, it's John McCain, it's Lindsey Graham. These are all people from the American state who are doing the dirty work for the financial interests behind. But you said Europe is in a weaker position. Well, surely Europe's in a much weaker position, because although Europe may have played and is playing a very sinister role in Ukraine and to some extent perhaps also in the other wars, and certainly in Venezuela, at least back in the days of Juan Guaido, Europe surely doesn't have this, the iron glove that hides the invisible hand. It doesn't have the iron glove, does it? Whereas America very clearly does have it. So perhaps I could ask you to develop what you began to say at the beginning when you said Europe is in an even worse situation than the United States.
Okay, so the United States has the global reserve currency. So already they are in the driver's seat when it comes to global trade. The United States has a military power with which they can still project power around the world. They
Yes.
cannot subdue the Taliban, they cannot subdue the Iranians, they cannot subdue the Yemenis, the Ansar Allah in Yemen and so forth. But they can go against places like Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, and they can, in variety of ways. It's not always a military intervention, but they can subjugate nations and force them into their own financial matrix, right?
Yes.
You're going to sell your stuff in crude oil. You're going to let our corporations in. We're going to give you the Marshall Plan or whatever. And they're going to be able to extract financial flows towards themselves in US dollars, which is going to float up their financial system, which is going to be able to float up their economic systems, create jobs and so forth. So they have maneuvering space, and they can, even though they're using the same monetary system, the same Ponzi scheme, they still have ways of kicking the can down the road and engineering a soft landing at the very least. The Europeans have none of that. They don't have a reserve currency really. It has a very, very minor role as a reserve currency, the euro. They have no ability to project military power. Maybe the UK did have it until 20, 30 years ago. Maybe France did have it until not so long ago, but apparently they no longer do. Britain is now using basically jihadi proxies as their military force where they need to intervene. If that fails, then they can always kind of try to pull the United States into it with their airstrike carrier groups, but it's sputtering. It's no longer working, and you could see that France practically lost all their colonial possessions in Africa, and that's going to constrain the money flows from those regions. And then,
meaning they're no longer on the balance sheet. See, I'm really kind of fascinated with that. Okay, because if you take these assets off the balance sheet, it's not really showing the condition of the government, but it's the condition of those that support the government, the banks.
Well, the asset is on the balance sheet, but now it's a non-performing loan.
Okay, there we go.
You see, it's bad debt.
Okay.
And bad debts risk to topple banks because all our banks are very highly leveraged. And then this is another place where the United States has an advantage because last time I looked, and these are probably at least probably a year-old statistics, but the US banks were leveraged about 20-fold. European banks were leveraged about 30-fold. And maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it's 10-fold and 20-fold.
Yeah.
But regardless, what that means, if you're leveraged 20-fold, if 5% of your loans become non-performing loans, you risk failing. And so what that means now is that either you will let banking institutions fail, which means that you're going to have like an instant depression in your economy because when a bank fails, all the depositories lose their money or most of it. So they can no longer afford to buy stuff the way they used to. They can no longer afford to pay their bills. Businesses end up failing. They have to shut down because they can no longer, people are no longer buying. They can no longer pay their bills. So you instantly have unemployment shooting up. Tax receipts become severely constrained. And so the whole system, what you get is a scenario of 1930s United States. So you had the collapse in 1929, and then a depression that practically lasted all the way until the start of World War II.
But see, we're going back to the beginning of our program here, and we started out by saying none of us really know what a massive economic crisis is. I witnessed it, the very end of it, in the late 1990s in Russia. I would not wish that on anyone. Okay, yeah. It was scary. It was really scary. So, I mean, kind of going full circle here, given you're kind of giving us the behind the curtain mechanics of all of this. It's very possible, given the indecision of the conflict against Iran, a unprovoked war. The way I look at it, and you're far more familiar with it, is that you can have very advanced societies like in East Asia that one morning they're just told the country is bankrupt. We're closed for business. And when I say that is that there's no apparent reason for it. I mean, it's not like you're being bombed or your country is being invaded. You just suddenly realize the the cash machines, the ATMs, they don't work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That's very important distinction, because it's not like economic depression happens and then cows stop making milk and the earth stops growing crops. Is the whole money machine grounds to a halt, and so the money is the intermediary. So maybe the cow gives milk, but I cannot sell it because nobody has any money to buy it from me, and I need money. So the way around this is to have alternative currencies. And when as the hyperinflationary crisis unfolded in Germany 100 years ago, these alternative local and regional currencies started popping up like mushrooms everywhere, because people just have to make do. So they say, like, okay, look, I can fix cars. Will you sell me 2 liters of milk for my children? And so maybe the guy doesn't need you to fix his car, but somebody else needs. And then people figure out, like, well, okay, let's create this currency as a token that we can exchange, so that
I saw it with my own eyes in Russia.
Yeah. Okay.
Huge billboards. People putting, I can do this. I can sell that. That was the market. You had to go and do your research. Okay, this guy will fix my kid's teeth if I can fix his car.
Exactly. But that's the economy. That is the reality of economy. And the economy, if it wasn't for the Ponzi scheme money, the economy could roll along, just because everybody needs food, everybody needs shelter, clothes, transport, communications, healthcare, education. It's not very complicated, and the let's say the list of needs that exists in a normal society is very limited, and it's actually relatively simple to satisfy them in an adequate way. But it's the whole monetary system that holds us hostage in their matrix that is putting everything at risk. And so now is the question of us busting out of this matrix, and how. And money is the key. Money is the chains that holds us in. And well, anyway, just to complete the story of where this money crisis is leading us. So there's 2 ways for the crisis to unravel. One is through a collapse and depression. If you allow a banking system to fail, like a large bank fails, usually it draws more banking systems, because banks are very highly exposed one to another.
Yeah,
I lived through the banking crisis in Venezuela in 1993, and the second largest bank, Banco Union, failed at some point. I think March 1993 or 1993. And then it dragged with itself the next 9 largest banks in Venezuela. Sorry, maybe it was 1994. I can't remember now. It doesn't matter. And the whole economy ground to a halt. Nothing was moving anymore. And this lasted for a few weeks. It was, again, as you said, it was a scary experience. But you can, what the central banks now do instead is they ramp up the printing presses, and they backstop all these non-performing loans to keep the banks from failing.
That's right.
But the result of that is that you get inflation start to accelerate. So I think that, given that our banking cartel has staged a coup, they're completely in control of the financial systems in the Western world. They no longer need to ask for bailouts. They don't need to go to lawmakers, to legislatures. They just do. And so now we have the Bank of Europe, European Central Bank, Bank of England, Federal Reserve Bank. They're all now active in the repo markets as lenders of last resort. So this is already happening, that they are printing up money, and flooding it into the system.
Sure.
And without fail, with some delay, this is going to generate inflation. And so we're going to probably get some kind of a Weimar Republic unraveling, which is probably going to be the most acute in the UK, but Europe is not in appreciably better shape.
Alex, I've always thought that we use the historical experience of Weimar, but I mean, I look at elites and their control of physical assets. Now, if there is a case of hyperinflation like Weimar, first of all, I mean, if you're on top of the food chain and there's hyperinflation, well, you can pay off your debts pretty fast because you're using a devalued currency. And if you own lots of farmland, for example, it doesn't really matter at a certain point what the value of the currency is. It's the value of your crops. Okay. The value of it is people want it because they're hungry. The specter of hyperinflation, and again, in the historical context of Weimar, it wiped out the middle class, obviously, as an engine to bring about the Nazi control because they were disillusioned. I think that it still stands today because hyperinflation is going to wipe out working people, however we define the middle class, wherever. But if you're at the very top and you're at the very top of the asset chain, well, great, let's pay off my debts. Let's start all over again. And they remain on top. Okay. Now, that doesn't always apply. I don't understand how the AI markets and the tech markets, because that's more technology and stuff like that. So I don't understand that element of it very well. But, the specter of hyperinflation, the very rich, that's not a bad proposition.
Generally the very rich find ways to rescue themselves, and some of them even get very, very much richer out of it. So during the Weimar inflation, wealthy people were able to dump their Reichsmarks and convert them to dollars or pounds. Some people ended up doing, as you suggest, take on large debts and pay them off in worthless money. One example of that was Hugo Stinnes. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but he was the Elon Musk of the age, and he became one of the wealthiest people in the world. But yeah, this happens, unfortunately. For ordinary people, the middle class gets wiped out, and their purchasing power collapses. Which is why my suggestion would be to try to take out as much money as possible from the system, which they're making it hard. If you go to a bank today and you say, "Can I have 10,000 euros in cash?" You're gonna go for some enhanced interrogation,
and, including Russia. Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Okay. I mean, I wanted, with my wife and I, we wanted to accelerate paying off a mortgage, and I mean really accelerate it. Well, you're gonna have to talk to this person. You're gonna have to talk to this person, and this. I said, look, this is my money. And I'm paying off my mortgage, and I'll talk to whoever, and I'll stay here as long as possible, but it's going to be done today. And finally they did, but they didn't make it easy.
But Alex, what's the point of taking out cash if the currency is going to collapse anyway? Why is cash?
The point is, okay, so if you take out cash, you can convert it into something that they normally wouldn't like you to convert your money into. So if I go to the bank and I instruct them to buy some gold for me, I'll get paper gold, which will be as good as cash. It's no good, basically.
Yeah.
But what I can do, if I manage to take up some cash, I can go and I can buy some gold in physical form.
Yeah.
Which, there's risks. Somebody can steal it from you. You can lose it. Your house can burn down.
Yeah.
But this is like a tsunami.
It's a very cumbersome currency.
Yes, but this financial tsunami is coming our way.
Yeah.
And it's going to wipe everything. So with cash in the bank, there's 100% certainty that it's going to be worth zero. Not tomorrow, but with time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can stash away something like gold and silver, or you can buy a plot of farmland, then that's a form of wealth that you can use after the crisis as well. Mm-hmm. So that's let's call it your life vest.
Yeah.
You're not suggesting like sell everything and put it all in gold, but have some to have a life vest, because
or to get through the crisis itself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because the crisis have a limited duration, and usually it may be 1 or 2 seasons that are so bad that it's almost life and death if you don't have some. So, have enough cash or gold or silver or chickens or whatever to bridge you over when things normalize, when a new currency is issued, when credit starts flowing again, jobs start opening, and you can maybe build a normal life once more. It's gonna be a hard slog, but we survived World War I, we survived World War II, we're gonna survive this crisis as well. But it's good to have a life vest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, I totally agree, and indeed have thought as you do for some time. But as you yourself have said, Alex, we don't know when it's going to happen. And so far, the system has withstood shocks. I mean, you mentioned the collapse of a Venezuelan bank, but we all know that Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, and that was somehow absorbed by colossal amounts of money printing. You mentioned the injection of credit by central banks. I mean, after the Lehman Brothers collapse and well into COVID, that was running for the Eurozone at like 60 billion euros a month, every month, for years and years and years. I mean, that's a colossal amount. And yes, it's produced inflation, asset inflation. It's helped the stock market go up and property prices and things. But the so-called inflation rate, which I've never believed in, but anyway, the so-called inflation rate remains completely manageable.
That's true, but I think that for geopolitical reasons, we are now in a different ball game. The Western financial institutions bet the ranch on Project Ukraine, and it failed.
Yeah.
And now they bet the ranch on Project Iran, and that failed too. And so now there's
also the simple fact, again, I don't have it in front of me, but a listing of major institutions that are seen as secure, like in 2005, the top 20, China had 2. Now they have like 16. Sure. I mean, money is moving because they, rightly or wrongly, and you can tell us, I mean, they don't seem to be part of this Ponzi scheme, okay?
Yeah, correct. The Chinese have insulated themselves from the global financial shocks by creating a dual circulation. So they have effectively 2 currencies, one which circulates inside the country that people use, they receive their salaries in renminbi, they use it for their daily, the internal economy of China functions on one currency, foreign trade of China functions through another currency. That's completely sensible. And when in 1997, when we had the East Asian financial crisis, the only country that withstood it, that wasn't even impacted, was China. All other countries basically collapsed. And at the beginning of the Trump administration, they were talking about exactly that, creating a dual circulation where, the domestic dollar is going to be insulated from any financial shocks due to the foreign dollar, the reserve currency. But I don't know where they are with that now, because they got so mired in this Iran war that it seems to be the central obsession, overwhelming all other considerations. So they are going to ambush us with some kind of a measure, because the U.S. economy is very vulnerable to the U.S. dollar. But I have not seen anything formulated that you could read and say, like, aha, this is what they're doing. There was that paper written by one of the advisors to Scott Bessent. I think his name is Steve Mirren, if I remember correctly. I read that paper. It seems to me like it was a draft that still needed work, but it was something. Seems that they're no longer talking about anything other than taking down Venezuela, taking down Cuba, taking down Iran, stealing Bitcoin from the Iranians, taking control of the oil flows. It seems that suddenly they went full on into this colonialist plunder, basically, to try to keep the collapse at bay.
Yeah. And with the time that we have left here, Alex, in your experience, because when we look at what's going on with the global economy because of what's going on in Iran, supply chains are under pressure, and once they break, is there any reason to believe it's just going to go back to normal, or would these supply chains have to be rethought? And what would be the calculation here? Because when we look at the oil shocks of the 1970s, that was because of the lack of, for the moment, of supply. We have in this case now, and as we're speaking probably right now, we have production destruction, not supply destruction, because supply, is when the embargo was over, there was plenty of oil. This is not the case this time round. I mean, getting production back up to where it was is going to take time. We have no idea. No one is telling the truth about the damage to these facilities in the Persian Gulf, be it military bases or oil production. And so supply chains,
or gas
they're going to have to reorient themselves, and that can be quite chaotic and scary itself.
Well, it seems to me that the supply chains are being reoriented, at least insofar as resources from the Gulf region are concerned, because the Iranians have conditioned passage through Strait of Hormuz. They're saying if you pay for the cargo in Chinese yuan, you may pass. If it's in US dollars, you may not pass. So basically, they're telling everybody petrodollar is finished, and so the flow of cargoes is diminished radically. It went from between 100 and 130 ships a day, went down to 20 to 30 ships a day. And then there's the US blockade in addition. But eventually that will get normalized, and I think that it's going to continue going in favor of trading in Chinese yuan and Indian rupiah, in Iranian
even
rial.
the Russian ruble.
In Russian, in Russian ruble as well. And I also understand that apparently Iranians made an offer to European economies to settle the trade in euros, which was actually extremely clever of them, because Europe has a very, very significant vulnerability to US dollar liquidity. And they're completely dependent on the Federal Reserve Bank to provide them that liquidity. Because if they run out of dollars, their foreign trade can grind to a halt. So if the Iranians gave them a way out, of course the Europeans can't possibly act on their own. So if the United
foolish people.
If the United States tells them to cut off their arm, they're going to cut off their arm. That's where we are in Europe. But there's a different dynamic happening as well, Peter, and that is if you talk about the destruction of production, that's happening in Europe. And I think that the reason is, to be blunt, Nazification and militarization of the European continent with the view of fighting World War III. Because, if you have a well-functioning economy and the young people have good career prospects, they can find good jobs, they can, buy homes and raise families, they're not terribly interested in fighting wars. So you kind of have to create misery first, create very high youth unemployment, basically steal the futures from under young men, and then offer them an alternative future, to tell them, well, it's all the Russians' fault. They are the evil people, and you have the opportunity to be a hero, to right the historical wrongs, kill the Russians, and then they're going to start spreading money to, European equivalent of Azov Battalion and C-14 and IDAR and all of those groups. So to do that, you have to first immiserate the whole population. Yeah. And I think this is exactly why they're doing what they're doing.
It's not, and hyperinflation will do it.
Yeah,
hyperinflation will do it. And they say never ascribe to malice what can be adequately explained by incompetence. I think it's exactly the inverse.
Exactly.
Don't ascribe to incompetence what can be explained by malice, and that's what we do.
Yeah. Well, that's a very somber note on which to end. Never ascribe to incompetence what can be ascribed to malice. I think I'll adopt that as my motto. Maybe it's your motto, so I better not steal it.
It's free. It's free for taking.
Okay. Excellent. Well, listen, it's been absolutely absorbing listening to you, Alex, and thank you very much for being with us for this hour, because I've learned a lot, and some of these things I've heard you say them before, but that was a wonderful synthesis. Thank you very much indeed, Alex Krainer.
Thank you for the invite. It was an honor to join you today, and
stay with us for a sec after we end the recording.
I will do. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. All right then. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.